Hello everybody, I'm Tony and you are watching Hard4Games. Today we're going to be talking about why the Nintendo 64 disk drive was a failure. Now the answer I'm going to give you today is straightforward, but it simultaneously differs from our understanding of its development history as we currently know it. Now we've covered the 64 disk drive a ton in the past, from its release software to the peripherals for the add-on to allow you to get online, to prototypes and beta content and development drives and this and that, but today is going to be a little bit different because of this. Now, I recently found an obscure Japanese publication called Digital Heroes by Sony Magazines Inc. It is the 1998 summer edition. I do not believe that this has been preserved. There's very little information about it online, and the only other issue I've been able to find is from 1993. The publication contains an interview with Yoshio Hongo, the chief of public relations for Nintendo at the time. I commissioned a translation to English, and the information within was very enlightening. He not only gave a specific reason for the 64 DD's delay, but also revealed Nintendo's then plan for the failed add-on peripheral. But first, let's review up on our history. The Nintendo 64 DD was a response to Nintendo's competitors, i.e. Sega and Sony primarily, utilizing an optical compact disc medium for their game storage. Nintendo obviously opted for a cartridge format, but understood that its storage limitations could be burdensome for developers. Their answer, at least at the time, was a proprietary magnetic disc format akin to a zip disk, although admittedly with less space than a zip disk. It could provide up to 64 megabytes or 512 megabits of data. This was moderately more than cartridges could hold at the time of the Nintendo 64's launch. Through 1997, game packs were sized between 4 and 12 megabytes, though toward the end of the console's life, higher storage carts reached 64 megabytes anyways. Examples of these larger carts being Conker's Bad Fur Day and Resident Evil 2. Obviously, the CD optical medium was significantly more in the hundreds, 600, 700 plus megabytes. Other benefits, though, of the magnetic medium would be the read-write capabilities of the discs, versus a CD, which was read-only. The 64 DD had a long history. It was initially announced at Shoshinkai/Space World 1995 and given a sort of tentative guesstimate launch date somewhere near the end of 1996. This, of course, did not happen. The DD was then shown off at Shoshinkai 1996, Shoshinkai 1997, Space World 1998 was completely skipped due to lack of DD software, and was functionally delayed until Space World 1999. The device itself did come out in early December of 1999, which for all intents and purposes, early December 1999 is basically the year 2000. Throughout this long time span between 95 and basically the year 2000, numerous launch dates were given and missed. So why was it a failure? Well, of course it was a failure because it was delayed, right? Delayed to the near twilight years of the Nintendo 64. Keep in mind that Space World 2000 saw the announcement of the GameCube, but times were beginning to shift. So the real question is, not so much why it failed, but why was it delayed? Because that directly influenced its failure. Most reports give one of two reasons. A, the hardware wasn't complete yet, or B, the software wasn't ready. So let's go ahead and explore the software aspect. Here's a short list of software which started development on the DD, but jumped ship to the cartridge format and launched prior to the launch of the DD. i.e. it had enough time to become a game, but basically left the platform for the regular console. We of course have Zelda Ocarina of Time, which was predicted to be the DD's killer app, released in 1998. Pokemon Snap, released March 21st, 1999. Donkey Kong 64, released in November of 1999. Pokemon Stadium, released April 1999. Mission Impossible, released 1998 in July. There are more, but you get the idea. Now, these switched to cartridge format earlier on, likely because the developers and publishers wanted the game to actually release. Though in fairness, it's entirely possible that in some situations, the DD development environment simply wasn't working for a particular game, but the point is, there was content in the pipeline. Content that got released, but they just couldn't reasonably wait for the add-on to fulfill a launch date. Let's go ahead and circle back to the Yoshio Hongo interview. Was it the hardware or was it the software that caused the delay of the 64 disk drive? Now keep in mind, this is the summer 1998 issue, meaning that the interview must have happened sometime previous to that for them to put it together and then release it summer 98. The interviewer asks, what is delaying the release of the 64 DD now? We're aiming for a release toward the end of the year. First things first though, matching that era of the N64 with games to buy is our highest priority. Without any reason to get the N64 now, there isn't much point for the 64 DD either. Why has there been such a long delay for its release? It's definitely a question of timing. The 64 DD is already complete and development on it has ended. The release has been coming along slowly because we've been trying to balance it with N64 games. Then we can progress to the next step of manufacturing it. For the N64 now, we've only reached 4 million units sold domestically. To sell dedicated hardware for the system at a decent pace, we'll need to reach 6 million units. Ultimately, selling more systems is our focus before hardware that expands on it. Getting people to understand what makes the Nintendo 64 fun to play comes first, then additional hardware will come next. So according to Mr. Hongo, the delay had absolutely nothing to do with hardware. It was complete. It wasn't mass manufactured, but it was complete. Nothing is mentioned regarding 64 DD specific software either. The problem was sales. Nintendo knew that the N64 was selling poorly and getting obliterated by the PlayStation. So if X% of an install base were likely to buy a hardware add-on, said install base, according to Nintendo, had to be 6 million units to make it profitable. So here we have an instance where, again, according to Mr. Hongo, they could have gone into full retail production but have been purposefully delaying. Meanwhile, their heavy hitters, Zelda, Kirby, Donkey Kong, are all jumping ship away from the platform. The 64 DD is functionally being brain drained due to the poor performance of the primary 64 unit. And also keep in mind, Nintendo only ever saw 5.54 million units being sold domestically, never reaching the goal that Mr. Hongo stated in the interview. So it must have been a vicious cycle for Nintendo. The 64 needed software, so they took it from the DD, over and over and over again, trying to boost their numbers to eventually allow a launch of a peripheral that was being bled dry simultaneously. So what did we eventually get? Well, in December of 1999, Nintendo released the Nintendo 64 disk drive via mail subscription only through the RANDnet starter kit. Basically the 64 DD, the 4 megabyte expansion pack, modem, RANDnet disk, everything you needed to get online. So the software that remained was basically content that just had to be on the 64 DD. Mario Artist, Doshin, F-Zero all required the read-write capabilities and the extra storage. Doshin 2 required hot swapping disks, and that golf game, I don't know how that golf game managed to stay on the disk drive and not jump ship. Good on it for staying the course. Didn't really need to be a DD game, but hey, good for you guys. And of course, anything that didn't need to be on the DD at that point switched over. Mario RPG, Animal Forest. No sense in making a game for a peripheral that has a tiny install base. But we're not quite done with that interview. There was another titillating little detail in here regarding what could have been. How much will a blank disc cost? A blank disc? We're not sure right now what we would sell them at. Once we have games we can sell with it, we'll think about incorporating data vending machines. At this point, we might sell data for a game that's growing more popular in Japan, like F-Zero X, for about 200 yen. For a brand new game, we're not really sure what we'd sell that for. When it comes to the cost of the discs compared to cartridges, they're most likely going to be much less expensive. Semiconductors aren't cheap, so that leads to cartridges being more costly. So Nintendo was thinking about doing for the 64 disk drive what they had been doing for the Super Famicom via the Nintendo Power Stations. Nintendo Power Stations were set up for the Super Famicom in late 1996. They allowed users to write games to specific blank cartridges for less than the cost of a new game. And a Game Boy variant was created in March of 2000. Before this, Nintendo had the Famicom Disk System Writer. This allowed users to write and rewrite Famicom Disk System games to blank discs. Again, they were data vending machines. Now, I mentioned this to our good friend Luigi Blood, and he showed me this, a trademark for a 64 DD data vending machine. Nintendo had begun the process of thinking of ways to distribute 64 games via this means, despite it never even coming close to fruition. Now, it is absolutely incredible to think about what could have been if the 64 was more successful. DD vending machines throughout Japan, so many games could have survived. It would have been a different gaming landscape for sure. But alas, what's done is done. They should have made the 64 either a magnetic or optical disc-based unit to begin with, at least business-wise, that would have made more sense. From a preservation perspective, I'm kind of glad they went with cartridges because I see so many magnetic and optical discs just like rotting out these days that I'm kind of happy that they're on cartridges. But again, that's just my personal opinion. Either way, it's fun to speculate regarding what could have been. So I have linked the scans and the interview translation in the description below if you'd like to check it out. And I do hope to scan more of this seemingly lost magazine in the near future as well. Now, for those of you that don't know, I've been slowly amassing an archive of scans of obscure Japanese and also European gaming magazines. My goal is to get as much of it scanned and translated as possible. Obviously, it's a very time-consuming thing, so I'm being a little bit picky regarding what is actually scanned and what is actually translated, but regardless, I want to be able to build a nice little archive that I can share with all of you for your collections. There's so much content out there, particularly just information and screenshot-wise, that is kind of seemingly lost, or at least unknown to us Westerners, right? Because we weren't at least initially, the primary audience for these magazines. So part of preservation in my mind is finding, the ROM, the ISO, the actual game to be able to play. But another part is, saving that information, those interviews, what the developers, the publishers, the PR executives were actually thinking at the time. I think that's also very important. So anyways, this has sort of been my little side project over the last couple of months. I'll keep you all posted regarding its progress. I've been making some good strides so far, but it's still kind of embryonic in terms of how far I've gotten. If you want to know more, definitely subscribe for updates. Join me on social media. I do announcements over there as well. But aside from that, just appreciate all of you watching this video and hope to see you next time. And like I said, I'll keep you posted.